Hey everybody, Happy New Year! I'm here to remind you that if you want to do something different with your art, or you want to try something new or just evolve, try something different with your process. I did that today and I cannot tell you the difference it made in what I created. So I started with bilateral drawing today, which is just drawing with two hands at the same time, and did some line work just to, activate the paper. Just means to make it not be a plain white piece of paper anymore. And I played around with that and ended up making something that is completely different than things I've made recently for sure, but perhaps ever. So this whole video is a reminder that if you want to do something different and you want to evolve your art, do something different with your process and just see what happens and be open to going a different direction. All right, come on along with me. I'll show you what I made. So this is the bilateral drawing I was talking about earlier. Just using two hands, two pencils in this case, and just moving my body. It's easier to do with a large piece of paper because you can use your whole arm, can lean into it. But this is not a new experience for me, but I don't use it very often. So it was really fun to do this and just play around. I typically don't use pencils a whole lot in the beginning, but you can see that it's somewhat symmetrical and it connects both sides of your brain, which is pretty fun. So if you're normally left-handed, you're activating the right side of your brain more when you use your left hand, and vice versa. Using both hands then kind of completes the whole package. Adding some paint. This is Pyrrole Red, and of course my fluorescent red from Nova Color Paints. Super fun. Shocker, had no plan, but I wanted to see what it was like to start off with the bilateral drawing, and I'm so glad that I did. This is watercolor paper, so it was not, I shouldn't say it wasn't, it was just, it was very absorbent. I did not gesso anything, so the paint did not go very far as I'm using my color shaper. If I had gesso on here, it would have gone a lot farther and not have been absorbed by the paper so much. Also, pro tip, I have regrets. If I were to do this over again, I would have put some masking tape on the bottom of the paper so it didn't slide all over the place. So apologies, but I will be chasing my paper most of this video. Just a quick reminder, if you like this video, please go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe. And if you hit the little alarm bell, I will give you a notification every time I have a new video. Anytime you interact with my videos, leave comments, likes, shares. You really help me out with the algorithm, and it gets my video in front of more people, so thank you. I think it's important to note that this part of my process is actually very common, where I just squirt paint on paper and smush it around with a color shaper. So this part, very normal, I guess I would say, or very common for me, common practice. I added some gloss medium here just to thin the paint a bit, to one, let it go farther on the paper and get better coverage, but also just so I could get some more subtle glazing effects. I added on some, what's this color called? Alizarin Crimson, just to get that darker value. None of this part, I have it on faster speed because none of this is super interesting compared to anything else I've typically done. I'm adding on some regular pink just for fun. And when I got to this point, it was a lot of warm colors coming at me. It could not have been, it's just a lot, right? I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to go with it, so I just kept playing around, adding more pink, seeing how that felt. Very process art right now. Just that I wasn't really worried about what it looked like necessarily, but I wanted it to be covered. I wanted the surface to be covered and have different areas and different kind of visual texture and value differences in each part of the paper. This is a large piece of paper. I think it's 30 by 22. If it's not that exactly, it's about that. So it was a large piece. In the past, I've taken paper like this, done something like this to it with just marks and paint, and then I've cut it up into smaller squares or rectangles. I knew that was an option that I could do here. I chose against it and just kept working with it as a large piece. So, as I mentioned, this is a lot of warm colors coming at me. Even though I added the yellow ochre, it's still very, very warm. I thought I would play with some collage, and I wanted to specifically bring out some tissue paper. A few weeks ago, I had done a video where I used a giant piece of tissue paper on top of an existing painting that I wasn't thrilled with. And then I used that and several layers of glazing over it and made this really warm, deep red area in a painting that I loved. So I thought that maybe this would be something like that. And you can see I'm not really sure what I'm doing, so I'm just placing things around, trying to see what shapes I would be making. And it's hard to know what tissue paper is going to look like on top of something, because as soon as you add the gloss medium, the tissue becomes much more transparent. And I realized, or I hypothesized, that these colors, because they're too close to the colors in the actual painting, I didn't think they would make a ton of difference, and I thought it would just make it flatter. And I did not want the color to become flatter. I wanted it to become more nuanced and have more depth. And then I started thinking about what color I should use, and I went back to my tissue paper shelf and got some other colors to try out. So this super rich green really sets off the red. They are complementary colors. So if you want someone to notice your red, add some green. If you want someone to notice your green, add some red. Through this time I spent placing things around, I thought maybe I could do a big landscape. Maybe I would do green on the bottom, maybe I'd do blue on the top. Went to see what other colors I had, but I really got stuck on this tissue idea. And I thought, what if I just paint with the tissue and see what comes of it? I really love the depth that comes from adding tissue on top of something that's already layered. It somehow compounds layering, in my mind anyway. So when my eyes see something that has like that veil of tissue between my eyes and the paint, it makes it more complex in ways that I just can't explain. No one ever said artists are good with their words. That's why we paint. So forgive me that. All right, so this is the part that changed the whole trajectory of this painting. I added a whole bunch of gloss medium. I'm going to add this giant piece of green tissue, and I don't know what's going to happen, but go big or go home, right? I decided I would go big. I was already at home, and I didn't want to have any dry spots underneath here, because that's the only time that I really get in trouble with my big collage of pieces. So if anything's dry underneath, then you have a patch, and then you can't get it to stick, and it's really annoying. I realized that I was going up way too high. The tension's building. Can you feel it? Can you feel it? What's going to happen? I don't know. All right. Brace yourself. This to me was so cool. Adding the tissue and having it be green, once it started becoming translucent, I got all of this depth. You can see the red shining through, but the green on top became really dark, and it did block out a lot of the paint underneath, but not all of it. And the richness of the green next to the red and all the warm colors on the outside of the tissue paper really set off the red. But there's so much happening behind the tissue that I absolutely became obsessed with as I was painting this. Because I'm using tissue that's not, it's just regular gift wrapping tissue. It turned my gloss medium green, so had this been a white background instead of a red background, you would definitely be able to see that. It was like a mint green. And you can see all the different waves of tissue where there was extra gloss medium underneath it in little pockets where the tissue folded up on itself. Some parts are thinner, some parts are thicker. I'm able to smooth some of them out, not all of them. And I loved it. It was giving me like landscape mountain vibes or something, where it's just kind of, it felt rough and I don't know. There was just so much richness. I can't stop saying the word rich. So this became now the highlight of the whole painting for me. And I wanted to just work with this to figure out what to do next, because I still didn't know what I was going to do next. But you might be able to guess based on my excitement over this obsession. So I'm working out very gently that extra gloss medium. You can see me kind of squeegee it out with my color shaper. I know some of this is out of view, but you can imagine with me. And these are the textures that you'd never know. Well, I would never know. I won't put it on you. I would never know how to make these textures if they hadn't just happened. And part of the reason I love collage is you do get marks in your paper that you didn't intend for, that you'd like to be completely flat, potentially, and not wrinkled, anything else like that. People ask me all the time, how do I do this without wrinkling things? And you don't. It's just that you either accept the wrinkles as part of the process or you don't. And I've learned to accept them. And in times like this, the wrinkles are kind of the star of the show here. It really is what makes this so interesting. If this had gone over like a completely flat piece of paper and there had been no variation in it, it wouldn't look as rich and cool and I don't know what other word to use. Again, artists we're visual people. Not so great with the words all the time. But can you see how when I added this other piece of green, that crack between the greens, well, it's hard to tell because of how this is lit, but trust me, where that crack now, it really sets off the red there because now there's just a little bit of red poking through. And I began painting with this paper. And I'm working here with negative space because I want that red to pop through. So I'm kind of covering up all the places I don't want red so that I can see the red and have that be really like the peekaboo star of this painting. And that's exactly what I did. I did play around with the idea of using other colors besides green. And it just didn't feel right. This green was so, again, I'm going to use the word rich, and so great with the red. And I loved the variations because the variations in the color underneath the green or through the green, right? You can see the warm red. You can see it turns into like a warm brown in some places. Over the yellow ochre, it's more of a lighter green. And over the pink, it's almost like I don't know, there's like purples back there. There's like a burgundy. There's all these different colors that I did not expect when you look at it through the green of the translucent tissue. And maybe this is obvious to everyone else, but it was such a transformation to me of what I did not expect that I just couldn't stop doing it. So this is now hyperspeed because it's more of the same. I spent so much time playing with this. I couldn't bring myself to put any other colors in for the same reasons as before. I just thought that maybe now I would like red, but I didn't want to flatten the color. I wanted all those variations in color to be set off behind the green. So one change that I made, and of course my mood that day and my risk tolerance and everything else, I'm sure I played into it. But starting off with the bilateral drawing, allowed my brain, I guess, to come at it from a different perspective. I did not plan to use tissue paper when I started this project. It just was the first thing I grabbed after I got the red down and the warm layer down. But it opened up my mind to seek different possibilities. And instead of picking opaque papers that would have also been cool, or doing more mark making or anything else that I could have chosen, which also would have been perfectly fine things to do. There's nothing wrong with those things. But today, I went a totally new direction and found this really cool, really cool, fun experiment. And I did not look back. So in that close-up, you can see the different layers. And from this angle, you can see it even better. See how some of the layers, some of that green still stays pretty green? I don't know if those were just drier areas or if it was on more of the pinky colors underneath that had more white. So therefore, the green was kind of going on over a whiter color and kept more of its green self. And then there's that deep burgundy where it's over the pyrrole red and the fluorescent red. And then it's greener toward the bottom where I had more of the yellow ochre. It's like a yellowy green. There's so much color variation in this that looks way more complicated than me using these 4 colors that I started with and putting green over it, green tissue. I mean, you'd have to tell me in person if you can tell that I just put tissue paper over it. Maybe it's very obvious. But again, I can't stop saying rich. I apologize. I will get a better vocabulary at some point in life. Or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just stop talking and you guys can just look at it. But it was so satisfying every time I put the green down to see what the visual texture would be of each new piece. And can you see that the red, the video I know is not the greatest to see fluorescent colors, but the red is kind of just glowing more and more and more as the rest of it gets covered up. So when it's mostly green, those cracks of the bright red with the fluorescent and the pyrrole showing through, they're just glowing. It's that beauty of putting complementary colors next to each other that really sets them off. And having bright red to start with helps. And it must also be something with the green that it was a deep green because it's not competing with the red. It's like a showcase showdown model from The Price is Right, like offering up the red. Hello, have you seen my red cracks lately? It's not taking focus off of the red. It's just drawing everything about where anyone looks right to these red lines. So I spent this afternoon going crazy over this, finding new pieces, figuring out how much red I wanted to show through, where I wanted the red to show through. And it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of figuring out which pieces I want where, how much red am I okay with being there? How much, do I want little pieces? Do I want big pieces? How to tear it so that it fit the piece that I wanted it to fit or the place I wanted it to fit. Which, now that I think about it, is also a bilateral thing. When you're tearing paper, that's also bilateral. You're using both hands to tear the paper, in most cases. So how interesting that maybe that's why collage is so cool. And so why I connect to it anyway. Because maybe that in me also opens up my brain and has kind of all systems firing because I am using both sides of my brain. Well, that's something new I didn't think about. I'd be interested to know what activities or media or whatever parts of your process, if you notice that there are different things that really get you fired up and excited and really sets off your brain in new directions. Like what part of the creative process really lights you up? Is it like the first couple brush strokes of paint? Is it marking up the canvas or the paper before you start painting? Is it collage, only collage? Is it tearing up the collage paper? Not even gluing it down, you just like tearing it up. That's the part that really gets your juices going. I'd have to think about that for my own art. In this instance, I can tell you, every time I glued the paper down, it made me so happy to see what was underneath, shining through. So, food for thought, right? Old dogs can learn new tricks. I've used tissue paper in collage before, but I've never only used tissue paper. And to be honest, if I had used the red or the pink, I don't think this would have been very interesting to me. It would have been another layer, and it might have looked cool. But it was the bold move of taking the green, not knowing it was going to be so gorgeous underneath, in my opinion, and having that be a success, that it was just, I don't know that it was intoxicating. It wasn't that great, but it was kind of this, put me in this little trance. You can see my husband in the background coming in to say something about something. I don't remember. And then it became this puzzle of figuring out where the green pieces should go. And I hadn't decided at this point if I wanted to cover up the whole thing with green or not. Because I did like just being able to see the red and the pink and the yellow also. But the more I put the green on, the more I realized that to make the red the star of the show, I had to cover up the red and just allow little bits of it to peek through. That's really where the magic happened. Because it's in those little peaks that really draw you in, and it looks like little trails of lava, or like the earth cracked and you're looking down into like the core of the earth, which hopefully none of us ever see in person because that would be terrifying. This is what people talk about when they say you have to kind of kill your darlings, and you have to be willing to paint over things and cover up things that you love in your paintings. This painting, while fun before I put the green on, had no shape. It had no, it was just bright and had lots of paint on it. And it was great for a background. But once I started putting this on it and literally covering up almost everything that I did in the first layer, if I wasn't willing to cover it up, I would never get to see how cool these trails of red look. And having an entire 30 by 22 piece of paper that's red and pink is very bold, but it's not very special. At least the way I did this one. I don't feel like it was very special. And having too much red, you're kind of like overpowered by it. And it's kind of like, wow, it's a lot of red. Okay, moving on. But having the red just poke through a little bit at a time, now the red becomes very special. And now you move in to see all the little nuanced pieces of color and shape and texture underneath the green. And now all of that becomes special too, even though it's more muted and you have to lean in a bit to see it. Had this all been red tissue paper on top, it would still just look like a giant piece of red. And that wasn't what I was going for. So, this is a reminder for you. This is a reminder for you. If you feel like you're stuck in a rut, you keep making the same thing, you don't want to make the same thing every time, you're not sure what else to do, try something else in the very early stages of your process than what you normally do. Try bilateral drawing. It's I've just showed you how to do it. All you do is grab a pencil with both hands, or grab a paintbrush with both hands, grab collage with both hands. Do something with both hands at the same time. And maybe it will give you a different perspective and it will open you up to try new things. And let me know what you find. I suspect it might be something pretty cool. And if nothing else, if you have fun with it and you try something new, you have literally nothing to lose. At the end of the day, it's paper. It's paper, it's a little bit of paint, it's some time, and you are certainly worth experimenting and spending a little bit of money on paint and paper. You can just use paper. You can use junk mail, right? You don't have to use anything fancy. Go out, make some art, try something new, and see what unfolds.